from the Enlightenment on, this intense belief that things are going to get better, we can only get smarter, reason will make us a much better society, and much of this, I think, just as Shulamit pointed out, was really brought to question with the Holocaust. And the image, I think, that brings this to bear is when Jacob Bronowski, famous scientist, in his series called The Ascent of Man, now I am dating myself, about 20 years ago, a television series where he showed the steady progress that mankind was making in science up until the 1920s and 30s, when then German science, which was kind of the queen of sciences of the day, started to use its knowledge and so forth really to back up an ideology of hate and really exclusivity. And Bronowski, in that film, you must watch the 11th section in the film. He goes to Auschwitz, he goes to the marshes where there are still remnants, and he picks the mud up. And he says, just as Shulamit pointed out, this was not science that did it. This was not modernity. This was men and women making decisions really to use their knowledge in a very negative way. All of which comes to the second point, which Shulamit also pointed out, and I think is also essential, that the more we look at the Holocaust, the more we realize that we have to think about what we mean by that word education. There is this idea, if you stuff enough events and knowledge into somebody's head about a discipline, they've got education. And they had very fine educated people that were involved with not only in the Holocaust, but in leadership positions. Education purely as learning details and knowledge and a discipline, I think we learned was not enough. There has to be some sort of moral component it doesn't have to be, and today class, we're going to do morals right after we study the events, but it has to be interwoven in there. The next point that I want to make in terms of the significance, to get me in 5 minutes is too much, but the next point that I really want to stress is the Holocaust, for the first time in history, having the International Military Tribunal, I think really forced the world to come a little bit to grips with how far mankind can go. That the world community has to take steps to not let this happen again, to look at those early warning signs. And lo and behold, in Jerusalem Post 2 days ago, Erwin Kotler from Canada pointed out that what was going on in Iran, we should listen to the words, because they are warning signs of things that may come. And we know that, and he very specifically mentions, we know that from our study and our understanding of the Holocaust and where things could go. So looking at those warning signs are absolute essential. And finally, I'd like to say, in terms of education with the Holocaust, one other essential, I think, that's come out for many of us, whatever cultural group we have in our classroom, is the notion that after we've looked at where things can go, we come around and we say, what is it we as individuals can do to make a difference? And I wish we had a study that would say to us, the more that students are aware of what happened and the details of what happened, the more they are willing to and thoughtful about trying to be not only citizens, but active, engaged citizens. And I think that's where we want to go with whatever their background may be.
Thank you.
So good morning. I'm here representing a federal institution of the United States government. For us, the rationale is quite simple. It's provided by Congress. In 1980, when Congress passed legislation establishing or calling for the establishment of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, they set clear guidelines of what our mission would be. First and foremost, it was to commemorate and tell the stories of the victims of the Holocaust and Nazi racial ideology. It's very important to stay in the core narrative of the Holocaust of European Jewry. It's very important to us. Secondly, we were to, can you believe I'm gone completely blank? The history, help me. Not education. I've gone completely blank. This is terrible.
I didn't that's why I
Okay, to tell the history of the Holocaust, that's one. The second one is to, let's go to the third one.
Okay, you go to the third.
The third one is to really show Americans what this has to do for them, what this means in an American context. This is really important for us because there were lots of questions about what are we doing building a memorial to an event that happened in Europe, not on American soil, with Americans only tendentiously involved in what was going on there. Why are we building it on the National Mall in the center of the heart of Washington, D.C., surrounded by monuments to American democracy? It made no sense. And in fact, when I first came to the museum in '92, I was asked constantly about, well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I travel every day from Baltimore to Washington to commute. And on the train, when they find out I was working at building the museum, they would ask me, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Now, I have to say that once the museum opened in 1993, since then it's been 15 years, and I have been asked that question exactly 0 times. It's very clear, once you see the exhibit, why the museum is on the mall in Washington, D.C. What the museum designers did, I think it was very important, is they took the core story of the Holocaust, the experience of European Jewry, and put it into the context of American society and American government. So for us, it's very important to look at the Holocaust and see what it has to say about us and the failures of our institutions. Oh, okay. This is very, very strange. So what it has to say about the failure of our institutions, of our national leaders, of our society to take any kind of meaningful action against the horrible events that were happening in Europe at the time. That's the lesson for us. That's the meaning for us. What does it mean to Americans? What does it mean about American democracy? To make Americans understand the fragility of democracy. We tend to believe that democracy is established in our institutions and would be permanent and always be there. And looking at the Holocaust, it's clear that it's an extremely fragile thing, democracy, and that it needs care, it needs support, it needs careful cultivation. It's not something that is an automatic given. You have to work at it, and that's a very important lesson for us. Also, we look at the Holocaust because it raises really fundamental questions, ethical, spiritual, political questions about what is the relationship between the individual and the state, what is the relationship between policy making, how are decisions made. Decisions making process is a very important thing for us. Personally, the last 7 or 8 years, I've been part of the museum's outreach to the professional groups. So looking at the role of professions in Nazi Germany to see what their role in the Nazi system was and what was their contribution to the Holocaust. And looking at the decisions that these professions made for a variety of reasons at that time. And using it as a way to look at decisions that are made in the professions in the United States today, as a way to strengthen their commitment to democracy, the commitment to equality and fairness in our society, and to underscore the importance of the decisions that they make. I live for the moment, what I call the moment of reflection. That when a leader in our society has to make a decision that impacts people's lives, I don't care how many, I don't care how important or how insignificant, if it impacts a person's life, I hope an event from the Holocaust comes to the fore of their thinking, and it causes them to take a moment, take a deep breath, and reflect on what is the bigger meaning of this decision. What is the broader impact or possible implications of this decision? And then to question themselves, really in the core of their being, am I making the right decision? And how do I know I'm making the right decision? That, for us, is the core of our commitment to the Holocaust, where, you can see if I can remember the missions now. Tell the history. Oh, that's it, tell the history. So commemorate the victims and honor the survivors. And then, this is really the almost impossible thing for us. Congress specifically mandated that the museum teach all Americans the history of the Holocaust. America is a tremendously diverse society. And as a federal institution, we can't treat one ethnic group or one nationality different than any other nationality in our society. So we're committed to teach the Holocaust to everybody. And within 10 years, possibly as early as 10 years, the demographic changes in American society will mean that there will be no majority group. There will all be a minority group in the United States.
And that's truly multi and intercultural.
Multi and intercultural, written large. This is part of our normal routine. So how do we know that we're being successful? I think this is key. We receive about 2 million visitors a year. So since 1993, we've had about 30 million visitors to the museum in Washington, D.C. 90% of them non-Jewish. So clearly they're finding that it resonates with them. We don't always know why or how it resonates with them, but clearly it does resonate with them. And we're working to focus that resonance in order to heighten the impact. I want the Holocaust to be an absolute vital part of our democracy, that decision makers especially, but every individual, when they're making a decision, that they think of what was the decision like during the time of the Third Reich, what decisions did they make that then had implications and consequences that went elsewhere. They really understand that decisions have consequences and you have to accept responsibility for those consequences. So thank you.
Thank you.
One of the questions was why is it important to teach the Holocaust? What makes this particular topic relevant to non-Jews? I think that the teaching of the Holocaust is crucial in order to fight against any kind of discrimination, emphasizing the Holocaust as the final destination. The last station of a long trip, who always starts as a first station with a simple act of discrimination, a pejorative comment, an insult, an act of harassment. And that first step always has the potential enough to travel along the way who drives straight to the concentration camps, to the shootings, and to other kinds of annihilation. And this is the reason, I think, why we must do all the effort to abort this path from the very beginning. I think that is at this point specifically that rests the importance of teaching the Holocaust. His application not only facing up anti-Semitic policies, but to all kinds of racist, xenophobic behaviors. Another interesting question was if the Holocaust belonged to the Jewish people or can people of other faiths and backgrounds pursue Holocaust studies. As an answer to that question, allow me to say that I am a walking example of those who are non-Jews from South America, Argentina, and here I am pursuing Holocaust studies at least in the last 10 years. Frankly, my answer is not only that the Holocaust is universal as a matter of concern and study. I think that it's a sad mistake to consider the Holocaust only as a Jewish matter, a lost chance for millions of non-Jewish people in the entire world to learn the lessons of the Holocaust and move them away of the position of potential bystanders. I repeat, and moving them away of the position of potential bystanders. Definitively, we will lose a chance to build better societies and closer to a repetition of history through another crimes against humanity. In fact, at least in my country, who have an important Jewish population, it is clear in the last years that the efforts of knowledge and clarification about the Holocaust finally had been directed to the non-Jewish citizens, because who belongs to the Jewish communities had yet this equipment of knowledge and clarification through his family, in the school, and so on. So if we want to achieve our goals in this matter, we must focus in the non-Jewish citizens as a priority, of course. Finally, it's important to ask ourselves, how do we teach the Holocaust in classes where students are antagonistic towards Jews or the topic? Because we can't close our eyes to the prejudice that sometimes brings students to our classes regarding the Jewish community in general and the Holocaust in particular. I think that we must adapt the methodology available to the challenge. And let me introduce in my intervention, if I have one more minute, an example of what I want to tell you, obtained from my experience as a federal judge. In 2006, 3 boys of 17 years old, secondary students of the middle class in Buenos Aires, made a serious act of harassment with anti-Semitic connotations against a boy of 15, a son of an Orthodox rabbi. These young aggressors had somehow influence of those circles of urban tribes that we all know. Even one of them had his head completely bald and had the noxious, harmful approximation to negationist literature and other Nazi cliches. Shortly, in my court, I noticed that the authors of the aggression never received any information about the Holocaust in their formal education. So I decided, instead of the expected punishment, whom surely would drive the aggressors to a bigger isolation from society and to a reaffirmation in their wrong way, I decided to do an educational mission. I established the court in the Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires and gave to the 3 aggressors with their parents a guided visit to our permanent exhibition with a class about Nazism and Holocaust, with the permanent support of the director of the museum, Graciela Hinich, who is present here too. Some people were pessimistic about the results, but today I can tell you that 3 young boys not only take conscious about what means an anti-Semitic or Nazi insult, and never again repeated that kind of incidents, but also the 3 of them voluntarily and spontaneously asked for forgiveness to the family of the victim, which was accepted. And not only that, the precedent took public state, was diffused by the mass media, and had a very good response of the public opinion, particularly in the Jewish community. You can see all this directly at the internet. Besides, allow me to say that we never had so much visitors in the Museum of the Shoah in Buenos Aires like the weeks after the diffusion of that case. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No history belongs to one community only, and especially the Holocaust is an intercultural historical phenomenon in itself. Before we have intercultural classes and before we have intercultural exchanges all over the world. Nevertheless, it means very different things to different groups, and I have to talk about one of the most important and most difficult cases, Germany, the country of the perpetrators. The Holocaust automatically is an unloved, unwished cultural heritage, often in the own narrow family itself. I have some friends whose fathers have been high SS officers in concentration camps, respectively in anti-Polish administration of the Generalgouvernement. They feel it a strong burden for their whole lifetime and are intensively working in Holocaust education, intercultural education, reconciliation activities. But reconciliation is another topic. The Holocaust is highly relevant for the German collective and individual identity, often unconsciously, and even for those who try to escape. There is a necessity of knowing, of mourning, of pity, not of self-pity, of shame, not of guilt, of distance to the ancestors' behavior, not to the sad facts, of integration to other nearly as horrible mass crimes of the Nazi regime we have heard about yesterday. This is a heavy burden for many young people. Others do not really grasp the special importance in Germany and Austria. Psychologically, you may say, for some Germans, remembrance kills pride. For others, pride kills remembrance. But the task is to combine honest commemoration and positive identity. This is not only true for national pride. You have to cope with the fact of arising from a perpetrator society. I don't want to be misunderstood. For all those born after the war or after 1933, this is not a problem of guilt. The suggestion of guilt only impedes learning in many cases, but a question of shame avoidance, of self-pity, of liability or responsibility, or in the best case, of mourning. And therefore it's very important to know what we have lost. Of course, I have a conviction about the relevance of the Holocaust to non-Jewish, non-German learners, but that's not my topic here. The German problem is highlighted very shortly in a famous quotation of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the intellectual forerunners of National Socialism. "You have committed that deed, says my memory, but my pride says you cannot have committed it, and remains relentless. In the end, my memory gives in." No doubt that this process is often going on unwillingly and unconsciously. Thus, our main purpose is not only stopping the process of mutual exclusion of identity and commemoration, but helping to make their combination willing, explicit, and conscious, reflective. This does not allow a final stroke, consider the Holocaust debate finished, what of course a minority in Germany wants to do, but demands a reflection about its relation and proportion to other catastrophes in history and life, and to other human rights and civil rights problems. We know comparatively well how the mental problem is solved by the vast majority of German young people of the fourth generation, meanwhile. It is done by a radical dissociation of cultural remembrance, that means the official state version, and of communicative remembrance. This mainly means the private family version of the story of National Socialism. The system of Nazis and Hitler was very bad and unbelievably criminal, and nearly all of the young people say that. But their own great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers did not participate at all in any vicious deeds like anti-Semitism or persecution. This version apparently is not valid at all. But it is strongly held by the majority in spite of all attempts of Holocaust education, and that's the results of some empirical studies during the last years. You know some of them, of course. Well, of course, now I had to talk for the same time span about the problem of intercultural teaching of Holocaust, because Germany is an immigration country, and
so maybe we'll get to that in the second round.
we'll do that in the second round. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Why? How? I think we're also asking the question, where? A quotation. Tara, age 15, goes to Jewish day school near us. The fact that no one stood up to what was happening to friends and neighbours is horrific. I will now do my best when I see trouble in my street and even around the world. Fact. 30% of all Asian and black people are targets of crime in a typical 12-month period in England. If you are mixed race, you can put that up to 46%. Fact. 2006, there were 1,700 anti-Semitic incidents in the UK. If you're Jewish, you're 4 times more likely to experience that than if you're Muslim. Another quotation. Famia, she's also 15. She goes to the Muslim day school. I did know about the Holocaust, but I was not aware about other genocides. I guess now it's up to us to make people more aware, or history will certainly repeat itself. Fact. 192,000 people voted for the British National Party at the last election in Britain. That's almost 1% of the entire eligible electorate. Another fact, the British National Party is anti-Semitic, but its main target are Asians and immigrants. Another fact, the British National Party has over 100 seats in councils across England. Another quotation, Karen. She's also 15. She's been permanently excluded from school. She's on one of our programs. During our visit to the centre, I experienced many emotions: sadness, anger, hatred, hope. I thought I was well prepared for this place. That is, until I met the Holocaust survivor. And then just when I thought it was all over, I saw the film on Rwanda. I just wanted to get up out of my seat and do something now. Another fact. Omar Sadiq Khan is serving life for the 7/7 bombings in London. Omar Khan Sharif and his accomplice Asif Hanif killed 3 and injured 60 at the Mike's Place bombing in Tel Aviv. All 3 suicide bombers lived in the catchment area of our Holocaust Centre. Another quotation. Carlton, he's age 16. He already has convictions for gun and knife crime. He's also on one of our programs. This seems more relevant than school trying to tell me to learn a new language or something. This is changing people's lives and stuff. To come here and learn this, that's a big learning opportunity. At school, I think they miss the really important things about life. It's a fact, 18 teenagers have been killed by knife crime this year in London alone. It's also a fact that the Singh family in Cockgrave, Nottinghamshire, were driven from their village because of racist hate crime. That's the 3rd family in that county in a year. And yet, it's all so near where I live. And so, I guess I'm inviting you to our peaceful Holocaust memorial in the county of Nottinghamshire. Perhaps you'd like to sit for a while in the rose gardens and remember 6 million wasted lives. But I suppose I'm also saying, don't come to hide. I invite you to our centre to struggle what happens in our backyard, to grapple with that dark unknown humanity. You see, if I worry about anything here, I'm worried that we don't really fear the Holocaust anymore. We do revere it. We do articulate it. We read it, discuss it. We teach about it. But sometimes it seems that we almost play with the memory, shuffling its victims almost like dolls in a pram, rearranging its pieces like some dark Legoland. I know it's not like that. But please, I guess if I say one thing, don't hide behind the camps and the corpses. Don't take authority from their suffering. Sometimes I wonder if what we really fear is ourselves. Perhaps we are the real unknown here. And in our search for meaning, we confront the Holocaust. We look into the abyss and find something we cannot articulate. We feel the pain, we feel the sorrow, we feel the loss. And we know deep in our soul it will never end. We know. We do know. Then all the things that should change us instead shield us, absolve us, engulf us. I guess thinking through our session today, what was in my mind was, don't embrace it. The Holocaust is not your friend. Fear it, because its nemesis is far closer than you really think. David Bankier was absolutely right yesterday. Kids do think we live in a different society, and so we do. We just need to tell them it's not a better society. I guess what I'm saying is I've done hiding because the reality close to home is way too stark. I suppose I'm saying, please, also look into your backyard, on your doorstep, in your home too. Because what are we afraid of, if not ourselves?
Just to respond to some of the things that we heard here, I think that the Holocaust has to be there really for a sign and awareness, and Stephen was talking about us teaching the Holocaust and looking into ourselves, if we're doing it really in a way that our students are really getting the feeling of what we're talking about, and not only teaching it, but how they accept it. But on the other hand, I have a little fear from the fact that for every problem in our society, we're running to Auschwitz, to the Holocaust. And I feel that sometimes the Holocaust really comes in when we can't solve our other problems ethically, and that our children really should grow up in kind of an environment that values from themselves. And we sometimes have to run to the Holocaust as a threatening. And I think that we have to be very careful in using the Holocaust all the time for these kinds of things. I say it has to be part of Western civilization or civilization identity, but it can't be the main part. And what I'm hearing many times that we have to teach the Holocaust because there are many problems. Holocaust causes awareness. You know, if the students not always after learning Holocaust they get better people, and we have to be very careful in looking for what I call it short-term results, because it's very effective to teach the Holocaust. We have to see that students that are growing up in civilization have a solid background of ethical values, that we have to bring them back to the modern world, and maybe be careful of all the time threatening of the evil on the other side, but they should grow up in a kind of positive values that are set in them growing up. So as much as I say that the Holocaust has to be part of the thing, but I think we have to line the word part of the conscience of civilization.
Thank you. It's on.
I would like to add to what Shulamit said. Yes, indeed, we have to clarify the concept first, and the education about the Nazi annihilation of European youth, that's one point. We have to distinguish from that the general genocide prevention education Of course, both are very close to each other, and there is a part in it, and there are common points, but there are distinguishing points as well. And the third point is a positive general human and civil rights education, which we urgently need, because teaching the genocides and the Holocaust only makes people depressive and sad and pessimistic and sometimes even cynical. So there is another point, of course, combined, of course tied to the other, but we have to talk about historical experiences with human and civil rights movement. We have to talk about that very difficult and long way where your own behavior matters to win women's voting rights, to abolish slavery, to win freedom of press, and so on and so on. We need this urgently in historical education, and it has to be tied to the other side. And this, of course, is important in immigration countries even more, because we have those minorities which in fact are not integrated, which in fact are discriminated in the labor system, in the political rights, and in education as well. And they often feel victimized themselves, and they often identify with Jews. They feel subdued like the Jews in the Nazi time in Germany. But on the other hand, they often identify with violence as well, especially the big Muslim minority sometimes is anti-Semitic, of course. We have round about 1/5 to 1/4 of school pupils with immigrant background of very, very different type. Some of Nazi allies, other of Nazi victims, which is an additional problem, of course. And at least I would like to mention one point. We often have the problems, or often, well, not seldom, the problem that they say Hitler is your, the Germans' problem, not ours, the immigrants, and they refuse to talk about. And on the other hand, they refuse the Turkish Armenian genocide completely, and often it would be necessary to mention this first and to make it sure at least, and then study in detail that famous German case. And again, it is not possible to begin with this. We know it especially from the Arab and Palestinian, the young people in Germany, but we made small experiments by showing them the subduing of Muslim, Turkish, black Germans or people in Germany during the Nazi time up to forced sterilization, and then they get it, and then they could work together with the others, they could work in their own groups, and they could work with the Germans in their classes. This is only one example to get the problem near to them, because when they hear use, it's often already a good thing, or sometimes already a good thing for them, but if they see what racism can mean to themselves, even much more than in their everyday experience where they feel victimized already, then you have the beginning of such a useful process.
So let's see if I can redeem myself a little bit. I'm a practical-minded historian, and what I thought I would like to do is give you some basic idea about how to evaluate materials for use in a multicultural classroom. Materials, ideas that we use at the museum, and I encourage my colleagues at the museum to use all the time. I think there are three things that you need to consider when looking at materials for use in a multicultural classroom. First is the historical context. How is the material you want to use, whether it's an artifact, an image, a document, or a piece of testimony, how does that piece fit into the core story, the core narrative of the Holocaust? It should be part of the main themes, part of the main story of the Holocaust, not some side area. The second thing to consider is the immediate context. How was this material generated? What was it generated for? Was there a purpose? Whose perspective does it reflect? Is it victim, perpetrator, bystander, rescuer? How does that fit into the mix? And third, in some cases, maybe the most important, is the educational purposes that you're going to put that material to. How does it reflect your rationale? Now, I want to give you, clear, because all three must be in harmony with each other. If you emphasize the one over the other two, then you're skewing or manipulating the history for a particular purpose. And believe me, your students will understand that. They'll catch on to that very quickly. If you shortchange the history or the immediate circumstances in order to make an educational point, manipulation. If you only talk about history and don't give an educational message, then you're just making them learn rote fact without meaning. So you really have to have all three together, then it's a legitimate material for use in the classroom. Let me give you an example of how this works. There's an image that I use in many of the programs at the museum. It is the Nazi stormtroopers very early in the Nazi regime in March 1933, and they're publicly humiliating a Jewish attorney named Dr. Michael Siegel in Munich. So basically they're marching him down the street with a sign around his neck that says, I am a Jew and I will never again complain to the police. That's the image. The immediate context is that as an attorney, he heard that one of his clients had been arrested by the police. He did what attorneys do. He went to the police to find out the circumstances of the case. The police turned him over to this stormtrooper unit, this SA unit. They beat him up. They knocked out his front teeth. They perforated his eardrum. They tore his trousers above the ankle. They took his shoes and socks and then put a sign around his neck and marched him through the street. That's the immediate context. The historical context is that this is not a singular event. This is part of a pattern of attacks on the court system in March, April 1933, putting pressure on nationalists in the government to expel Jews from the civil service, from the government. The motto was, we want Germanic law, not Jewish law. That led to the law for the restoration of the professional civil service and the widespread purge of Jews from government service. So that's the historical context. The educational uses and the rationale, and here's where you can see where it really connects with different audiences in different ways. A professional audience, somebody in the legal profession, they connect to that image through their profession. For them, it's horrifying to think that a lawyer in the course of his duties is then targeted and attacked and beaten up just because he's Jewish. He's prevented from doing his job as a lawyer. So they connect it through the profession, and that becomes very meaningful for them. There are groups in the United States that feel that they have no civil protection of the law, especially African Americans. They often feel targeted by the law. So, and immigrant groups as well. So when they see it, they focus in on, oh, he no longer has the civil protection of the police. The police aren't there to be his friend. They're not going to help him. The police won't help me either. So they connect to it on that level. And to give you an example of just how powerful this can be, I was at a teachers' conference, a teachers' training conference in Atlanta, Georgia, in the southern part of the United States. Large African-American population. I was at a conference where there was only 3 African-Americans, teachers. And we were talking about the systematic persecution of Jews in the 1930s. We used the Dr. Siegel image. We talked about the forcing of Jews to the fringes of German society at the time. And then he stood up and he said, I had my doubts about coming here. I didn't think that the Holocaust had any meaning for me as an African American. It had nothing to tell me. He said that morning, he was stopped by the Georgian Highway Patrol driving while black, meaning he was an African American in an affluent white neighborhood, and they stopped him thinking that he was casing the place to do a robbery.
And this was recently?
This was last year. Oh yeah, last year. He said, for me, this has such meaning because, I don't need a yellow star. My skin color is my yellow star. And he connected then to the history of the Holocaust as a way to get at the narrative, the core narrative of the Holocaust, through that experience. So thank you.
I make my decisions are influenced not only by sort of my own immediate experiences, but also what's going on around me in my community. So using lots of stories about who I am and having students, very much like Stephen's students, bring in their own experiences to start out. Hook them with, wow, this could be about me. I hope you can hear this mic here. Okay.
Maybe a little closer.
A little bit closer. So once we start with that building block, the next building block, before we get to Dr. Siegel's and before we get to the history, is really to talk about what happens when you're in one group and you look at another group. How does we turn against they? How does neighbor turn against neighbor? And the concept we use, which has really proven a wonderful way for discussion, whether you're looking at the history or thinking about today, is thinking about your universe of obligation. Who are those, either as an individual that you care about enough to do something for when something happens, or with nations? Who's in your universe of obligation? Who's outside your universe of obligation? And getting students thinking that way. And when Helen Fine initially developed that concept in her book, Accounting for Genocide, she was thinking of nations. But it's equally interesting to think about that with individuals. And we use stories here about sort of those with a kind of a narrow universe of obligation, those that might have a wider universe of obligation. And we take one story of an 8th grader. I love Stephen's stories. They were so cool because they were right from the garden, right from your experiences there. This is an 8th grader that had facing history. And she says, you know, I always felt the outsider. I looked like everybody else. I dressed like everybody else. We were all friends. But for some reason, and we all have in our class somebody that just doesn't fit in, and she felt she just didn't fit in. She didn't know what caused this hatred of her. Then a new girl came. And the other girls in the class they grabbed her diary and made fun of her, the new girl. And the girl telling the story says, I joined in to make fun of her because it was more important for me to belong to the group than it was to help this girl. Here is, sort of human behavior working in an everyday example. Then you take those building blocks of human behavior and you start to look at how that operates in the very historical context of the Holocaust. And here, none of us have mentioned, except to mention quickly, the fragility of democracy. But I think for our narrative of the Holocaust, we need to start with looking at that interwar period, especially the Weimar era. What went wrong with that wonderful, you could probably tell us how good a constitution they had there. You can have a beautiful constitution on paper. What happens, though, when a people not used to democracy aren't able to carry it through in a very hard time? And here we have to know all those difficult circumstances that they were trying to build that democracy in. Here is where we begin to see how a society could move toward looking to some solution, whether it be a person or a political party or whatever.
An extreme solution.
Oh, yeah. I'm running out of time? Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Can I just finish
okay.
one quick second? Once we've looked at the decision-making within the context of the Holocaust, going through the final solution, then the question comes back to, all right, how do we, as citizens, choose to participate that things like this don't happen again? Where do we make decisions ourselves? And knowing that history gives us a way to think about our decision-making. And so we come back to the very thing that Shulamit started with first, about decision-making, I think, which is absolutely critical. I apologize for taking
No.
So I want to suggest a third way of opening to multicultural, and that's Yad Vashem's way. And we have a very interesting group of Arabs and Israeli students coming together. They study in the same class to Yad Vashem on a special program. And you can, of course, imagine how much tense there is when a group of Arab Israelis come with Israeli students to Yad Vashem, although they study together, and it's a real multicultural class. So we were really thinking, on one hand, we really believe that you have to begin with the Holocaust. And this is the difference, you know, Mary, we're already debating on that for many years, facing history on ourselves, or to begin. And I want to suggest a way how with multicultural and the sensitivity, you can begin with the Holocaust, but in a different way. We decided to introduce them to the man Janusz Korczak. And Janusz Korczak, you know, he was an educator and a doctor, and he lived in between two wars in Poland, and he had two orphanages, one a Polish one and one a Jewish one. And his philosophy was how to love the child. This is so interesting, how children should grow up in a society when you give them a lot of respect. Talking about multicultural, the first thing for multicultural is really to show them that we respect them. And Janusz Korczak, with all his philosophy, saw children equally, and all the time, all his philosophy was in a direction how to respect the child and to let him grow better in the world. Now, our activity that we suggest Arabs and Israeli students, we put on the floor statements of Janusz Korczak educational philosophy. Now, it's in Arabic and in Hebrew, so it's very important for multicultural also the question of language, that they should feel comfortable when they come to us. So the statements are in Arabic and in Hebrew. Now, we're not talking about Holocaust yet. We're talking about Janusz Korczak as a philosopher. We find something universal between the students and classroom. We talk and expose his philosophy. Now, the students are discussing it. They discuss what they agree and what they don't agree with Janusz Korczak. You know, we're discussing only the man, and we picked him, you know, because they feel closer to him. After they feel already empathy and they went through this activity, we begin talking about Janusz Korczak and his identity, which was also, he saw himself as a Polish Jew, and as I said, he had two orphanages, one Jewish one and one Polish one, because he was really thinking about children in the world. This was actually his message. Now, who is Janusz Korczak? Janusz Korczak, from the individual, we begin talking history. Yes, Janusz Korczak was present in the Warsaw Ghetto. And what is the Warsaw Ghetto? He was one, again, the individual story that they can feel empathy with. They like Janusz Korczak. They don't have any more stereotypes about him when we talk about him. So we talk about his experience in the ghetto, but we all the time keep talking about him being a brilliant educator and his morals, and he continued to do it in the ghetto. When we come to his last decision, you know, he was given an opportunity to rescue himself, but he decided until the end to go with the children to Treblinka. So we talk about how his decision illuminates who he was before that. So you see, and you know, after 2 hours we go to the museum and they're ready to hear the story of the Holocaust, without all these baggage already. When Janusz Korczak became, now I picked Janusz Korczak, I didn't pick Mordechai Anilevich for them. You understand? So it means, as you said, we have to know who the audience is, what kind of assumptions they come in. How can we, I think that in multicultural the most important thing is the process of learning. Not the learning itself, but more the process of learning, engaging the students. There's a lot of baggage that they come in, and if we can take some of this baggage, and that's why I think that we can do it through the Holocaust itself. I mean, when we take the human story, there are enough things that we can engage in then through the Holocaust.
Okay. In this issue, I think that I think that the challenge is to convert an apparent difficult in an opportunity of improve the performance of our speech. A multicultural class is, I think, that is I don't know, but I think that it's a good scene to deploy all the arguments who brings the teaching of the Holocaust in order to value the importance of the tolerance in the framework of the democracy, in the framework of the state of law. No matters the religion, the color of the skin, the political preference, the social class. I think that the Holocaust is the most radical example of what happens when democracy and the state of law disappears. And that, I think that is a key point from this. Also, we must always remember, facing a multicultural class, that the Holocaust was perpetrated by a racist state who pursued not only Jews, but all kinds of political opposites, communists, socialists, liberals, priests, gypsies, homosexuals, mental handicapped, and other minorities, whom was appointed as strangers to the community or lives who does not deserve keep living. Another interesting axis of this meeting is how do we teach the Holocaust in countries where students may have experienced their own national and personal tragedies. In my country, Argentina, we have a military dictatorship in the 70s of the last century who built 300 of clandestine places of systematic kidnapping and torture, and who murdered almost 11,000 citizens labeled as political enemies. It was the most dark page of our history as a nation. As judge, I formally declare that all these crimes were crimes against humanity, but the comparison between the Holocaust and the state terrorism in Argentina brings us, as a teacher, another perspective. The students, in my experience, acquire the lessons of the episodes as a non-question. The comparison helps to feel the students also the Holocaust as a non-question. And so much closer in time and space. In my classes of Holocaust and law to university students, I learned the importance of the interaction between the Holocaust and the local state terrorism, although preserving, of course, the uniqueness of the Shoah between other genocides and massive crimes. Both differences and similarities are productive to the comprehension of this kind of phenomena. As an example of difference, when I explained the whole sum of killed in that years in Argentina was equivalent to 1 day of work in the extermination plant of Treblinka in 1943 or in Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1944, perhaps the students may feel the real dimension of the Jewish catastrophe. And as an example of similarity, the process of dispersonalization led by the Nazis in the concentration camps, as well as the military perpetrators in Argentina in the clandestine places of kidnapping and torture, have several points of contact who allows us to recognize the genetic vestige of Nazi proceedings between the internal enemies used by the military hierarchy in a systematic way to achieve their own final solution to the subversive question. In the same way, the military dictators used also the Nazis' Nacht and Nebel, night and fog, system to make disappear all trace of those who was considered his internal enemies. It was very useful, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.